Okay, we're going to do chapter 9. Sorry, chapter 9. 9. Chapter 9. Emerging Adulthood, chapter 9. Okay, if I can get this thing to work. There we go. Okay, here we go. Chapter 9. So we're talking about people your age, or maybe you're a little bit older, people that just graduated from high school. Anyway, there are five distinctive characteristics of emerging childhood, adulthood, age of identity explorations. They explore various possibilities of work and love. Age of instability, exploration leads to instability. Self-focused age, learning to be more self-sufficient before committing to something else. Age of feeling in between, feeling of being in transition. You're not a child anymore, but you're too old to be a child, but people still look at you and treat you like you're a child. An age of possibilities, potential for dramatic changes, and of course we're all looking for dramatic changes, hoping for dramatic changes. Explore various possibilities of work and love. In the 1960s, the median age of marriage in most developed countries was in the low 20s. Now, this is true of me as well. In 1960, I was married in 1969. I was 19 years old when I got married, and so this really fits me, actually. It was in the 1960s, it was 21 for women and 23 for men. In the United States today, the average age of marriage is 27. In all other countries, the average age at marriage is 30. One of the interesting things about other industrialized countries is that their population growth is below zero. In other words, they're not replacing their population. They did a study not very long ago, and what they discovered in Japan was that over 30% of the people over 30 were still virgin. They had never had sex. Something that you don't think about when you think of Japan. You don't think of these things, but the reality is that sex is not that popular with teenagers and emerging adults. This delay to marriage is due to four revolutionary changes: the technology revolution, of course, the sexual revolution, the women's movement, and the youth movement. And I've been watching these for almost all my life. They had the sexual revolution sometime in the 70s. I was in the military at the time, so I didn't really get to be part of it. Technology revolution, of course, computers were invented back in they were invented during World War II, but personal computers came to be popular in the 1970s, 1980s, and on and on. The internet wasn't invented until 1993, and actually it was invented before that, but it was only for military use. Um, so technology revolution has just exploded. If you think about records, how do you play music? When I was a child, you played music using records, and then eventually you got to cassette player, or actually next you got to 8 tracks, and then next was cassettes, then CDs, and now of course nobody uses CDs anymore. I have a car that doesn't have a CD player in it. It has a USB port for your MP3. Anyway, technology revolution, sexual revolution, as I said before, occurred. We're going to talk about this in just a minute. Birth control pills were invented and it became possible for anybody to get birth control pills about 1964. They invented before that, but they were by prescription only. Well, they were still prescription only, but They were only used for women who had problems with pregnancy, who they didn't want to get pregnant, individuals that had endometriosis or whatever their problems were. But then in 1964, they became available to just about any woman that wanted them. All you needed to do was go to see the doctor and tell him that you were sexually active and you didn't want to have children. The women's movement, of course, came from this as well. We're going to talk about the women's movement as well. And then the youth movement in the United States happened in the late 70s, early 80s. As emerging adults explore different possibilities in love and work, the rest of their life tends to be in flux as well. They tend to move from one residence to the other, seeking to find where they belong. They move out of their parents' abode for the first time and they taste freedom. And of course, after that, you don't know where they're going to go next, or they don't know where they're going to go next. The rate of residential change in the past year, as you can see, the individuals that move out the most are 18 to 24-year-olds. And of course, once you retire, there's always a possibility you're going to have to move into an assisted living facility if you have any physical problems. But as you can see, most people, the main time, 30% of the people, more than 30% of the people, 32% to 30% of the people, they're moving between age 18 and age 30, 31, 32. These are the people that move the most. 20-somethings may move to college, of course. They may move after graduation, have to move away from college usually. They may move in with a romantic partner. They may move around the country or the world to study or to work. Almost half of American emerging adults move back in with their parents at least once before they find permanent residence. And of course, we're talking about Western society here. We're not really talking about indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples very often will live with their parents and to help take care of their parents, and that's very common, but not so much with Westerners. Westerners are seeking to be alone, I guess, or to be away from their kids once they raise their kids to grow up and to move away. Emerging adulthood is a time when individuals shift from reliance on their parents to their own life. These individuals must focus on themselves to develop the self-reliance to make this traumatic break from the old selves to their new selves. Individuals of this age are developing decision-making skills, knowledge, and self-understanding. Individuals of this age tend to be less egocentric than adolescents, but they're seeking self-sufficiency is what they're seeking. Often these emerging adults feel like they are stuck in between. They're no longer adolescents, but not yet an adult, and that's what we were saying before. Research indicates that these individuals often don't feel like adults until they are in their late 20s. Often they feel like they are approaching adulthood, but haven't quite gotten there yet. In my own case, it was worse than that because I looked so young. I'm not very tall. I was fairly slender, so people thought that I was a child even into my 30s. I was teaching school. Wait a minute, when did I start teaching? 1983. In 1983, I was 34 years old. Really? No. Yeah, 1983. I was 34 years old. I had to grow a mustache. I was teaching high school. I had to grow a mustache because people got me mixed up with the junior high students. So in order to look like an adult, I had to grow a mustache. And I don't grow very good mustaches, let me tell you. Anyway, so mine was a little bit more prolonged than other individuals, just because I looked so young. I didn't have a beard, you know. When I was in the military, I only shaved about once a week, whereas most people shaved, you know, every day. They had to shave every day. I only had to shave once or twice a week. So, yeah, pretty young looking person. But now that I'm old, I'm really old, but I don't look that old. Research shows that it isn't only emerging adults in the United States that feel that they're in between. These individuals, the same age individuals in Argentina, Israel, the Czech Republic, China, and Austria also feel the same way. Emerging adults live in a world of expanding possibilities. Few of their dreams have been tested yet. Research shows that 89% believe that they will fulfill their dreams someday. If there is a problem in their life, such as a negative family life, this is the time when they're on their own and they can move beyond their past. And hopefully that's what happens with them. In the 1950s, manufacturing in the United States was based on the hard commodities, but since then, of course, manufacturing has changed to that of a service economy. Because of the increasing need for knowledge of technology, education has been extended past high school, and this is known as tertiary education. Most people are delaying marriage thoughts or plans until they are done with their education. Thus, they are delaying marriage into their late 20s now. There was a question as to how many children you could have if you waited until your 20s. My mother was married at age 28, and eventually she had 6 kids. She started in 1944 and she ended in 1954 was the last time she had a child. So for 10 years she was having babies. And she stopped when she was 38 years old. Um, People today don't really do that. They don't have children as readily as they did back in the 40s and 50s. They wait longer between children. I was born. My sister was born in February of 48, and I was born in October of 49, and that's not all that long. It's about, what is that, 16, 18 months, something like that. The sexual revolution was sparked by the invention of the birth control pill in 1964. Actually, it was invented before that, but it became available to just about anybody in 1964. Because the fear of pregnancy was removed, sexual morality changed, and the sexual revolution was the result. And of course, if you look back at this era, then this is what you're actually seeing. Before 1964, before birth control pills, people stayed together because they were afraid. Not only that, but women weren't working at this time. Women didn't start working until birth control pills. People were afraid to hire women because they were afraid they'd get pregnant and leave right away. So they just as soon as they got trained, they would leave. This was a good excuse. At least this was an excuse that they used not to hire women. Because intercourse could be engaged without fear of pregnancy, people took longer and longer to decide to marry, and that's what's happened today. Now, most young people have a series of sexual relationships before getting married, and premarital sexual relationships enjoys widespread tolerance, whereas before premarital sex or just casual sex was greatly frowned upon. The women's movement morphed out of the civil rights and peace movements of the 1950s through the 1970s. The movement expanded the opportunities for young women, giving them options beyond marriage and homemaking. Colleges that had low percentages of women in the 1950s and 1960s began bursting at the seams, and actually that should be an A instead of two E's, with a larger and larger percentage of women. Now almost all occupations are open to women, whereas they have been closed. They had been closed before. One of the interesting aspects of the 60s and 70s was the revolutionary youth movement that denigrated adulthood and exalted youth. In the 1950s, teenagers were eager to enter adulthood, so early marriage was very common. However, in today's world, adolescents and young adults see marriage and everything that comes with it, children and a home, as something to be avoided. These individuals are trying to delay such serious responsibilities as long as possible. Europe has the longest emerging adulthood time. The average age of marriage and parenthood are around 30, and this is in Europe. Asians aren't considered adults until they are capable of supporting their parents financially. This may curtail identity exploration seen in European countries as well. So, so you'll see this in Europe. They don't even start thinking about getting married until they're in their 30s. In Asia, of course, the individual has to be able financially to take care of their aging parents because they don't have the social security we have in the United States. Developing countries tend to be split between urban and rural. Urban young people are more likely to experience emerging adulthood. Rural young people have fewer opportunities for schooling and exploring. Emerging adulthood is a period of peak physical functioning. VO2 peaks in the early 20s. Reaction, grip strength, and bone density are at its peak. This is the time when the individual is the least susceptible to physical illness. Has a questionable lifestyle encourages poor nutrition, high stress, and lack of sleep. College students more than twice as like are college students more than twice as likely to show are more than twice as likely to show symptoms of delayed sleep phase syndrome. Sleeping longer on the weekends and holidays than through the week. This is the delayed sleep syndrome. This leads to poor academic and job performance, of course. College students tend to accumulate a sleep debt that they try to recover during any downtime. And of course, most of the downtime is through the weekend. Two-thirds of students report sleep problems. One quarter report severe sleep disturbances such as insomnia, eveningness versus morningness. Some emerging adults prefer early to bed and early to rise, while others have a more late to bed, late to rise pattern. These patterns tend to change with age due to growth hormones. And of course, they have just recently finished a research project where they determined that night owls don't do as good a job as people that are early to bed, early to rise. Those individuals. Emerging adults are encouraged to maintain good sleep hygiene, wake up at the same time each day, get regular exercise, take late afternoon naps, limit caffeine intake, avoid excessive alcohol intake because that messes up your sleep pattern. In the United States, car fatalities are highest between the ages of 16 to 24. This is due to the inexperience. The most dangerous time for a driver is the year after they receive their driver's license. They're more likely to have an accident. Risky driving behavior, speeding, driving under the influence, following too closely, not obeying traffic signs and signals, changing lanes erratically, passing in at inappropriate times, allowing too little time to merge, and failing to yield for pedestrians. This is especially true for male drivers. Male drivers are much more dangerous than female drivers. Nearly half of U.S. college students admit to having driven intoxicated in the past year. Young drivers are less likely to wear seatbelts. Drivers not wearing seatbelts are twice as likely to die, 3 times more likely to be injured. Socialization impacts number of accidents. The more friends in a car, the more likely the driver will have an accident. Personality characteristics can promote high-risk driving. Sensation seeking and aggressiveness are the 2 personality characteristics that make an individual more likely to have an accident. Reducing fatalities includes parental involvement and monitoring of the young driver. Graduated driver licensing is also effective. Complete freedom is not awarded until the individual has a clean record for a number of years. And then they get their permanent driver's license, I guess. Rates of car fatalities by age, as you can see, right there between 16 and 24. Males have a lot of accidents, females not so much. 21st birthday parties can be painful. Some people take their very first legal drink at 21 and may drink to excess. The day may pass in a haze of alcohol to be followed by a day of hangover. Drinking may not hold the same attraction after this, since legal doesn't have the same titillation as illegal. And one of the things that we know is that the age range where the people drink the most are between the ages of 18 and 21, despite the fact that it's the legal drinking age is 21 in all states. For most people, adult means accepting responsibilities that adults must face: marriage, raising a family, providing for the family through work. This is known as role transition, accepting the duties and responsibilities of an adult. Substance abuse peaks in the early 20s. Peak and decline is possibly explained by unstructured socializing. College-age students have more unstructured time, causing peak drinking. This also may be the first time the individual has had any time to themselves. Before, they were always being watched by an adult. Role transition causes decline in substance abuse. And here we go, binge drinking. As you can see, there you go, binge drinking in the early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and then it tapers off after that. About 63% of the people in the United States drink regularly, 63%, which means 37% don't drink regularly. Drinking in most industrialized countries has been declining over the past 2 decades because of the expense of alcohol and tougher drinking laws. As long as a person doesn't drink and drive, 2 glasses of wine or 1 beer makes them less likely to have a stroke. So drinking something is better for you than not drinking at all. But of course, becoming inebriated is very dangerous. Binge drinking is defined as consuming 5 or more drinks in a row. In most cases, drinking that much alcohol in a short period of time will get the individual quite drunk. Several antisocial behaviors are associated with binge drinking, including rape, assault, drunk driving, and domestic abuse. And here are some very attractive pictures of people that are drunk. There you go. That's where you want to be, right behind the toilet. Okay, this is a picture of 2 guys. One is sleeping on top of the bench, and the other one is sleeping underneath the bench. And here's 2 people sleeping on top of each other. Oh, geez, I don't understand this one. This guy has collapsed his chair because he is inebriated. Okay, night out with the gang, $30. Rounds of $1.99 shooter specials, $40. Self-experiment with date rape, drug rohypnol, roofies, $10. Forgetting that you're pissed drunk, laying spread eagle on the sidewalk in front of a bar and not in bed with your lover is priceless. And of course, this poor young lady is not sure where she is. She is so drunk. And she thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. Nice to have friends, isn't it? 1 in 13 adults abuses alcohol or are alcoholic. 1 out of every 13 adults. Alcohol dependence is a combination of several chemicals in the brain that causes the individual to crave alcohol. It's mostly has to do with glutamates. Glutamate excites the nervous system. GABA inhibits impulsiveness. Norepinephrine becomes involved. Dopamine becomes involved. Serotonin gets involved. Opioid peptides. All these neurotransmitters react to alcohol. Long-term drinking can deplete or increase levels of these chemicals in the brain so that the individual craves the substance on a relatively constant basis. And this is the one that really confuses me. I don't know how in the world he ever got in there, but he was sleeping. Of course, she's sleeping on the floor of a bathroom. Not the best smelling place in the world, but you never know. Researchers have determined that as people age, they develop the ability to use better and better judgment. And this is known as post-formal thought. Truth may vary from situation to situation. Solutions must be realistic to be reasonable. Ambiguity and contradiction are the rule rather than the exception. Emotion and subjective factors usually play a role in thinking. One of the things you realize as you get older is that there's very little that is actually black and white. Almost everything is shades of gray. And of course, that has to do with ambiguity and contradiction. So as you get older, these are things that become more obvious to you. Part of post-formal thought is the development of reflective judgment, or the ability to reason through dilemmas dealing with current affairs, religion, science, personal relationships, and other daily factors. Reflective judgment is not automatic and takes decades to develop. And of course, this gets really interesting because they tell you never to talk about politics or religion because they're too controversial. But the reality, as you get older, that's you like to do that. You like to do that because now suddenly your brain is more attuned to these things, and so you're better able to argue, not argue, but to discuss religion and what's going on in the world, science, how you get along with people, and politics. Politics that has to do with current affairs, of course. So, unfortunately, reflective judgment is not automatic and takes decades to develop, which is kind of tragic. The first three stages in the reflective judgment model represents pre-reflective thought. In these stages, the individual does not perceive that their perception could possibly be inaccurate. These individuals have a hard time understanding that some problems do not have cut and dried answers. And of course, the longer you've been alive, the more you realize that most of these questions, there are some things that have absolute answers, but not very many. In stages 4 and 5, the individual acknowledges that not all situations have conditions that can be totally known. Solutions must be based on situations and evidence. Knowledge is seen as subjective. As the individual moves into stages 6 and 7, they realize that knowledge is constructed from evidence and argument after careful analysis evidence and argument after careful analysis of the problem or situation. Reflective judgment is only possible through continual reevaluation of beliefs and new evidence. Training beyond secondary school is called tertiary education. We already talked about that. Around World War I, less than 10% of the population in any country obtained tertiary education. Until the 1970s, most of the people seeking tertiary education were men. Because of religious beliefs, women were considered cognitively and emotionally inferior to men. And you can see this if you watch an old movie from the 1950s or 1960s. This idea comes out very frequently. Tertiary education has become a normative experience with women outnumbering men now, and the ratio is sometimes 60-40, sometimes 65-35. Dene College is probably more 55-45, I would imagine. But other places where I've been, almost, the majority of the individuals going to the college were female and not male. This was not the way it was back in the 60s and 70s when I went to college. I started college in 1967 and graduated in 1971. Worldwide enrollment in tertiary education. Tertiary education doesn't have to mean college. It can be an associate degree. It can be some kind of post high school training. As you can see, United States, not so much in Canada, which is kind of interesting. The United States is more than 75%. Uh, Eastern Europe is more than 75%. Australia, Argentina, this is Colombia, I believe, or maybe it's Venezuela. But the rest of Europe, not so much. Not easy to get into college in Canada or any Europe for that matter. If you want to go to college in England, not the easiest thing in the world. Countries vary widely in how they structure tertiary education. Japan is relaxed and undemanding in university years. It is 4 years of sanctioned activities to think about what you want to do and how you want to help Japan. After the highly competitive middle school and high school years, this will probably be the only time in their lives when they are encouraged to be leisurely. So if you go to Japan and you're around college students, university students, they don't go to class a lot. It's really kind of interesting. They're not like we do in the United States. I mean, in the United States, you're in class all the time. I was reading a Japanese novel the other day by Haruki Murakami, and he was talking about when he was in college. And I'll tell you, the guy he he seemed to take weeks and weeks off. It was really just bizarre. European colleges have no general education requirements. Not like Dene College, of course. Your first 2 years are pretty much general education, and even in your program, your 120 hours you need for a bachelor's degree. About 60 hours of that will be in general education. Traditionally, they study 6 years in a specific discipline, in their discipline only. So if you study psychology, you don't have to take any classes in philosophy or you don't have to take a biology class or math class. You just have to take psychology classes. Currently, the European colleges are changing to match the United States pattern. In the United States, we've been talking about liberal arts education for a really long time, since I was in college, and that is pretty much the idea is that you need to before see in England or in Europe they want you to already know what you want to do by the time you go to college, but in the United States it's not that way. We expect you to still be looking for your passion. So that's one of the reasons why we throw you into all those classes, in the biology classes, in the math classes, in the English classes. What is it that you want to do? Now you might be an individual like me. I have five college degrees. My first college degree was in English, not in psychology. My second college degree was in medical laboratory technology when I was in the service. My third degree was in psychology. My fourth degree was in political science, and my fifth degree was my PhD in psychology. And I would have studied political science, except I couldn't find a program. So instead of studying political science, about the only thing I could find was psychology, and that's the reason I have a PhD in psychology. I'm not unhappy about it. It's just that that wasn't my original. My original idea was political science. But I have a lot of knowledge in English. I have a lot of knowledge in medicine. Anyway, not the way you do it in Europe. U.S. Canada supports the first 2 years of general education for exploration. That's the way you do it in the United States. Many Americans will take 6 years to earn a 4-year degree, yet only 57% will finish their degree even in 6 years. Major reasons for the delay in finishing their education: they change majors, they decide they want to go another direction. I have a former student who I was his advisor, but I was his advisor when he got into the psychology program. But he started out as a computer major, then he went to environmental science, then he went to psychology. psychology, but he was such a good student that he was able he was able to complete his 4-year degree in 4 years. But he changed his major 3 times. You can add a minor. He added a minor when he was a computer major. He took a bunch of math classes, so we were able to get him a major just by him taking 2 extra classes. Taking advantage of internships, of course, is another reason. Taking advantage of studying abroad. He is actually a foreign student, so he's from Bangladesh, so he didn't he didn't need to go overseas. He'd already been to all over Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong, India, of course, because he's from Bangladesh. Financial constraints, tuition has increased by a factor of 4 since 1982. Financial aid has shifted from grants to loans. Once upon a time, when they first started this whole student loan program, the idea was that banks were supposed to finance low interest loans. And unfortunately, in the 80s and 90s, they were making so much money that they decided to sell the loans. And every time they sold the loans, they kicked up the interest rates. And now we're to the point where it is very expensive to go to college. Not if you go to a tribal college, of course, but if you go to another college, a lot of times it can cost you $100,000 to $150,000 to get a 4-year degree. Societies benefit from having an educated population because it allows for economic growth in a world economy. The individual benefits through higher earnings and occupational status, verbal and quantitative skills, oral and written communication, distinct identity, social confidence, increased self-concept, and psychological well-being. And of course, that is the benefit of being highly educated. The college bonus, knowing economic benefits for showing economic benefits of tertiary education. Where's the education level? High school graduate, 2-year college degree, bachelor's degree. As you can see, if you have a bachelor's degree, then this is the percentage of the unemployment rate is low. It's like 2.5% or about 3.5%. But your earnings are a lot higher. This is, I don't know when this is from. Anyway, your earnings are just that much higher. If you have a 2-year college degree, it's $30,000. If you have a bachelor's degree or more, the average salary is $46,000. High school graduate, somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 a year. There you go. And vast majority of people only have a high school diploma. For some, the job search is systematic and changing. For others, the job search is more meandering and without focus. After tertiary education, many struggle to find work that pays enough to live on. Without tertiary education, basic skills are needed to obtain employment. 6 basic skills are necessary for new jobs. And this is if you want to get a job in manufacturing, you need to be able to read at a 9th grade level. You need to be able to do math at a 9th grade level. That's college. That's high school algebra. Solving semi-structured problems. You need to be a problem solver on your own. You need to be able to communicate orally and in writing. You need to be able to use a computer for word processing and other tasks. In other words, you need to communicate. Word processing. Um, word processing is a computer that isn't attached to the internet. Computers used to be word processors because all you were trying to do was they were a new typewriter that was easier to correct. That's what a word processor was. And then, of course, when the internet came to be, people needed computers to connect to the internet. But still, most of the stuff that you do is as a word processor. When I type out your tests, I'm using my computer as a word processor. And so that was the majority of the tasks that you did. Now, of course, you're connected to the internet all the time. They've got the cloud. It's things have changed from the word processing days. And collaborating in diverse groups, you need to be able to do that, to be able to get along with people. Unemployment rates are twice as high for emerging adults as for adults beyond age 25. Unemployment for young adults and teens is especially high as they are for minorities. Over half of high school dropouts are unemployed. Manufacturing jobs have diminished, of course, so the unskilled labor market is much less than it used to be. Urban decline also impacted rise in unemployment. Self-esteem increases with emerging adulthood. Awkwardness of physical appearance declines because their appearance becomes more stable. When you're in high school, of course, oh, she's powerlifting. How much is that? Those are plastic, so they're not. That's not 100 pounds. That's probably. Well, it might be. It might be 100 pounds. Then that's a 35-pound bar, and she's powerlifting it, as you can see. You can tell by the way she's gripping the bar. That's a power lift. It's probably, those are probably 25-pound weights. 50, it's 85 pounds. Peer evaluations from high school are less likely as people get away from high school social milieu. Family relationships tend to improve. There's a greater degree of control over one's life. Erickson identified this time as identity versus identity confusion. That's the crisis that people were going through. Cliquishness and intolerance of differences, both hallmarks of the adolescent social scene, are defenses against identity confusion. And that's why you identify with cliques. That's why you are intolerant of other people, because you haven't determined who you are yet. That's the idea of the person with no face, and then she's putting on a mask. Individuals need a stable identity before reaching intimacy, and this may explain prolonged cohabitation and less frequent marriages. Identity formation historically has been thought to occur in adolescence. However, emerging adulthood is the time period of importance for identity formation. The key areas to form identity are love, work, and ideology. And of course, ideology, we're talking about how you feel about religion, how you feel about politics. And of course, you found a stable job and you're in a stable relationship. Three elements of identity development: assessing abilities and strengths. Who am I? Identifications that have accumulated by modeling, acting like other individuals. Do I like acting this way? Do I like being this person? Who do I need to be? Assessing the opportunities available to them in society. Marcia classified adolescence into one of four identity statuses: diffusion, moratorium, foreclosure, and achievement. Culture influences identity. Many cultures view the self as interdependent in relation to others rather than independent. And of course, I will talk about this if you take any of my social psych classes. We talk about this all the time. The difference between collectivist societies and independent societies. The difference between Dene philosophies and the Dene philosophies and Western philosophies. So it has to do with culture. A lot of it has to do with culture. And it's not just indigenous people in the United States. It's also people in Spain, people in Japan. Everyone's culture dictates to you how you are supposed to act. And of course, Dene culture isn't any different. And neither is Hoosier. I'm from Indiana, so I'm a Hoosier, and that neither is the Hoosier culture. The Hoosier culture tells you who you're supposed to be. Fascinating going home for my high school reunion. It was my 50th high school reunion. I went home, and I thought, these people aren't the same as I am. I've been in the military. I've moved all over the world. So my idea of who I was, and who I was supposed to be was completely different. Even my track coach, who I just admired, was iconic to me. When I went back and visited him at my 50th high school reunion, it was really kind of fascinating because he seemed so pedestrian and he seemed so worldly wise before. But the reality was he'd never really left Indiana, so he had always been a Hoosier, and that was very very different from who I saw him as initially. I saw him as a worldly wise individual, and the reality was that I had been so many different places and had seen so many different things that I seemed more worldly wise to me than he was. Exploration to establish identity is not possible in some cultures where choices are limited by economy and strict traditions. And of course, traditions will tell you how you're supposed to act. Work may be limited by economy, marriage and dating may be limited by traditional parents and arranged marriages. And of course, arranged marriages are more common in the world than for love marriages, and that's just reality. If we're looking at the 7 billion people in the world, the vast majority of them will become married to somebody that has been arranged for them. Exploration of ideology occurs more in Western countries, whereas other cultures do not tolerate such independent thought. Globalization impacts development of bicultural identity. Um, you have your local culture, and then and this was the difference between me and the people that I went to high school with. My culture is a more global culture. It's a more hybrid identity. And the reason it is because I've lived all over the world with other people, and I had to get along with them. If I acted like a Hoosier and I wanted them to act like Hoosiers, that wouldn't have made any sense because they weren't. So why would they act that way? I mean, I grew up on a farm in Indiana. I can't expect people from Los Angeles or people from Denver or Washington, D.C. to act like farmers from Indiana. That just doesn't make any sense. Identity is more complex if the individual is a member of an ethnic minority group. As adolescents move into adulthood, they become more and more aware of their ethnic identity. Minority adults are forced into a dual identity, their minority status and majority status, African American, French Canadian, Turkish Dutch. Four ways of responding to ethnic awareness, and we talk about this in social psychology, don't we? Cultural psychology. Sorry. Assimilation is adopting the ways of the majority culture. That would mean if you're a Dene, then you would assimilation would mean that you act white. That's what assimilation would mean. Marginality, rejecting both your own culture and that of the majority culture. You're upset with, you don't like Western culture because of some of the things that they did in the past. You're irritated with your parents because they want you to act a certain way and you don't want to act that way. So so you would act as neither a Westerner or as a Dene person, and that would be marginality. Separation, interacting only with your own ethnic group. If you refuse to be around Westerners, if a white guy came around, you would step away because you didn't want to talk to him, or you'd glare at him. This happened to me the other day in a Zoom meeting. I started talking, and this guy got mad because he didn't think that because I was a Bilagana I should be talking, and he glared at me. It was really kind of unnerving, and that would be separation. He had his own point, and I understood it. Biculturalism, developing dual identity, and of course, if you have parentage that, and I had a discussion with, I was talking to Jeremiah or Dr. or Professor Barber the other day, and we were talking about, well, what if your one parent is Hopi and the other parent is Navajo? They each, which do you identify with? He was talking about an individual that had died of COVID, and he was a Navajo, and his wife was a Paiute, and the Paiutes came down, and they were going to take control of the funeral uh, and it was their mindset was completely different. So it was really there was this conversation as to what was going to happen to the person's former earthly remains, and I'm not sure how it turned out. Ideas about gender have become more egalitarian in the United States during the 21st century. However, gender stereotypes still do exist, especially with regard to work. Women's work is more likely to be rated less favorable than men's, even by other women, and this is something that we need to get over. We need to stop seeing uh, women at work as less productive than a males. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Smith and Snell in 2010 found that among emerging adults, religious beliefs were stronger than their behavior. 44% reported that belief was important in their lives. Religious doctrine is not as important as a belief in God. 75% reported believing in God. And we're going to talk about this in just a second. I think, yeah, we're going to talk about this in just a second. More tolerant, were more tolerant of religious differences, which is something that you didn't see. I think I haven't told you guys about this, but once upon a time, when I was growing up, I grew up in a Methodist town. There were three Methodist churches in town. So if you weren't a Methodist, you were fairly not you weren't really tolerated in the town, and I wasn't a Methodist. Neither were any of my brothers and sisters, but they would pretend to be Methodist, or they would be passing, even though they didn't go to church. They would still claim Methodist status somehow. But I refuse to do that, being the irritating person that I am. So it was tough. A lot of the dances were at the De Malay Hall, which has something to do with the Methodist Church. And I couldn't go. I mean, they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me in. As weird as that seems. Anyway, um, people today are far more tolerant than they were back then. I actually went to. We had school-sanctioned Bible study on Thursday afternoons at the Methodist Church, of course, right across from the school. That you wouldn't see that today. There's just too much differences in people. This was a Methodist town, and so they thought that they could send people to church, and I refused to go, of course. Religious beliefs related to higher well-being and lower high-risk behaviors, and of course, that is a real positive of being a religious person. Whoops, I'm sorry. According to Smith and Snell in 2010, emerging adults tend to have a more individualized approach to religion. There are four major categories of individuals. The first category is agnostic or atheist, or atheists. Agnostics are people that don't believe in a specific uh, religion, but they are questioning. Atheists are people that don't believe in religion at all. They don't, the atheist means no God. That's what it means. So they don't believe in any set religion. 40% most 40% most are complacent, though there are some who are strongly anti-religious. Um, some people think of atheists or agnostics as Satanists, but you can't be. Or I guess you could, if you could be a Satanist if you're agnostic, but atheists don't believe in any higher beings. So that includes Satan. That includes everybody. Okay, so atheists don't believe that there is a supreme being. Deists. This is really kind of interesting, and this is something that most people don't acknowledge. But if you look at the religion of most of our early presidents, they were deists. They believed that there is something out there, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't go to church. But they believed that there was a God. And about 15% of the population in the United States are deists. As you can see, that's 55% have this different idea of what's going on out there. Liberal believers, 30% liberally accept and ignore what they want from their faith, and 15% are conservative believers. They have strong traditional beliefs in religion. Now, if you look at the percentages, you've got about 55% who don't believe in any religion, or they don't believe in any set religion, and only 45% are believers, and only 15% are strong believers. And this is according to the work by Smith and Snell in 2010. So you can take that any way you like. Those are the statistics. In the United States, participation in conventional politics is low. People don't vote. They did in the last election. The last election really brought people out of the woodwork. They may be involved in political parties. Volunteer work and political demonstration is quite high. High involvement in political extremes, increases in political extremes impacted by fewer social ties and obligations to other age periods. Increased involvement could also be identity related. So if you were watching what was going on this summer and you saw people in the Black Lives Movement, a lot of them were people in their 20s. There were a lot of people in their 20s out there marching. Not just African Americans, of course. There were also people of other ethnic backgrounds. But there were a lot of people that were out there, and the vast majority of them were in their 20s, to 30. They were young kids. They were kids. Well, they were kids to me. They're not really kids. They're emerging adults. In the United States, most children leave home at about 18 or 19 years of age. We're not talking about on the reservations. We're really talking about the general population in the United States. General population in the United States, what is it now? It's about 17% Hispanic, about 70% white, about 13% black. So that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about white people. We're also talking about African Americans, and we're talking about Hispanics as well. So when you're talking about those groups of individuals, those three major groups of people in the United States, the vast majority of them leave home sometime between 18 and 19 years of age. Common reasons for leaving, going to college, maybe they're moving in with somebody, they're cohabitating with somebody, or maybe they're just seeking their own independence. Increased quality of parental interaction occurs after leaving home. Now contact is voluntary, of course, so it's a little bit different than it was before. The parents could dictate what was going to happen next, but as an independent person or somebody living with somebody else or somebody in college, they have a degree of independence that they didn't have before. Increased quality, okay, we already talked about that. Ethnic minorities tend to stay at home longer. 40% of all emerging adults will return to the nest at least once, and that includes all ethnic groups. A trend that social scientists have been seeing in the last couple of decades is the young adult who graduates from college and moves back in with their parents before resolving Erickson's intimacy versus isolation dilemma. These individuals are referred to as thresholders or incompletely launched young adults. And there was a movie about 15 years ago called Failure to Launch, and they were talking about young adults who they couldn't get them out of their houses. Terry Bradshaw was in that movie, and Matthew McConaughey and Sarah Jessica Parker was an expert at getting men to leave their homes, their parents' homes. And of course, Matthew McConaughey was Terry Bradshaw's son. Fascinating. There are 4 patterns for young adults leaving home. In-time leavers left before turning 25. About 55% of kids leave before they turn 25. The average male moves out at about age 23. The average female moves out at about age 21. Still in the nesters are people who are actively trying to move out and will be out by 25, about 14%. Late leavers are still living at home at 25, that's about 20% of the population. And returners are children that develop an independent life and then return to their birth home later on, and that's about 11% of the population of emerging adults. European emerging adults stay at home longer than in the United States. European emerging adults value mutual support of their family. It affords them a higher standard of living, staying at home. Parental understanding increases in emerging adults. Intimacy grows in importance as people pass from adolescence to adulthood. Emerging adults have fewer friends, but those they do have, there is more self-disclosure, though fewer shared activities than they did in high school. In high school, their friends were an excuse to get out of the house. Now they don't need that excuse because most of them are independent, as we saw here. Most of them, 55% are already gone out of the house, and 14%, that's 60, 70%, don't live at home with their parents. There's an increased time in unstructured activities. There is a decline in leisure activities as people age, mostly because they're working so much. Once upon not very long ago, it was taboo to talk about sex. Sex was so feared that when Lucy was pregnant with little Ricky, the word pregnant could not be used in the television show. This was the I Love Lucy show from the 1950s. In the early sitcoms, when they showed the bedroom of the parents, they slept in twin beds, not a double bed. Even Rob and Laura Petrie in that's the Dick Van Dyke Show, I think, was what it was. As you can see, they weren't even in the same bed. They didn't even sleep in the same bed. And there's Lucy and Ricky, and there's Laura and Rob Petrie in their own beds, double beds. Sex is more accepted in today's society than it was back then, of course. You could even say pregnant on television. In today's society, premarital sex is expected, non-marital sex is common, and casual sex is touted as perfectly acceptable behavior. The old double standard where males were allowed more sexual freedom than females is now considered passé. Research has shown that sexual mores in the United States have changed a great deal. One study showed that of individuals born before 1910, 61% of the men, but only 12% of the women had had premarital sex. Well, how in the world did that happen? Well, that's what was going on was they either had mistresses or they were visiting prostitutes. This was very common with this age group. By the 1980s, the ratio was almost even for males and females, but as the hippie generation ages, sexual attitudes of the older generation seems to be liberalizing. This is really kind of a fascinating piece of research. How long were you with your partner before you first cheated? As you can see, men and women are purple and pink. These colors, months. It was the same. 1 year, less women, more men. 2 years, more women and less men. 3 to 5 years, a lot more women than men. And there you go, as you can see. Women are doing it too. They're cheating on their husbands. There are 4 basic forms of sexual orientation. We'll talk about it right now. Heterosexual, that's what is the most common. People are attracted to members of the opposite sex. But homosexuality does exist, of course, where you're attracted to members of the same sex. Bisexuals are attracted to members of both sexes. And asexuality, which hardly anybody talks about, where the individual's not attracted to anybody. They're not attracted, if they're a male, they're not attracted to females. If they're a male, they're not attracted to males. They're just not attracted to anybody. Sexual orientation represents feelings and self-concept. They may or may not be expressed in behavior. So you can have an individual that does not feels like they're heterosexual, but they never get married. You can have an individual who feels attraction for the same sex, the same gender, but they never have sex with anybody. While homosexuality has been around since the dawn of man, it was considered a mental illness until the DSM-3 about 50 years ago. So if you looked in the DSM-3, and I don't have a copy of it, I have a copy of the DSM-4, but in the DSM-3, it was not, DSM-2 and DSM-1, it was, homosexuality was considered a mental illness. Yet homosexuality has been acceptable in more countries than it has been rejected. And in one ancient Western society, ancient Greece, it was the accepted norm. And this is a picture from a vase, a Greek vase. As you can see, the older man is about to fondle the young man's genitals. Incidence of homosexuality seems to be about the same in all cultures, so it's very common. It's common in a select percentage of people seem to be gay, both male and female. In the United States, about 2.8% of males and 1.4% of females identify themselves as homosexual. Homosexual encounters do not make someone gay. 5% of males and 4% of females report adult homosexual encounters in their lifetime. People in large cities report more homosexual encounters for males, about 9%, but only 3% for women. So what does this mean? What it actually means is individuals who are gay gravitate to cities. So if somebody was a farmer from Indiana or Ohio or Illinois, and they were gay, they probably wouldn't stay on the farm in Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois. They'd go to Chicago or Cincinnati or St. Louis or whatever. They'd go someplace where they could find somebody to have a physical relationship with. It's just the way it works. Sexual orientation emerges for most people in early adolescence without any prior sexual experience. For this reason, psychologists do not consider sexual orientation a conscious choice that can be changed. Biology may play an important role in sexual orientation. Research shows looking at homosexuality and sibling connections, the closer the genetic connection, the more likely a similar orientation. Some research indicates that male homosexuality may actually run in families. And of course, as time goes by, remember, sex was a taboo subject, and it still is to some extent in the United States. There are people who are more conservative. Those individuals don't want to talk about this. It's people on the other side, people who are a little bit more liberal. Only they are willing to talk about this. So as we do more and more research, we're finding out more and more things, and it's really kind of fascinating to watch this changing over time. One of the residual benefits of the sexual revolution has been the acceptance of being single. 60% of women and 80% of men between 20 and 24 are not married. 5% of women and 4% of men never marry in their lifetimes. Reasons include freedom in movement and sexuality, fear of divorce, joy in being alone. And of course, these two individuals, he's watching a soccer game, I assume, since he's got a soccer ball on his lap. And she's just happy to be out all by herself. Internet use is higher among emerging adults than any other group. Emerging adults spend an average of 3.5 hours a day on the internet. It's used for college work, of course. A study in the UK found that the number of hours online negatively correlated with grades. Social networking, presentation issues can become controversial. Identity play can be common. So people can change their identities. That has to do with social networking. You can act like a different person. You can even change your gender if you like, I guess. Pornography is the number one use of the internet is to view pornography. In a study of college students, 87% of the males and 31% of the females reported viewing internet pornography. Mobile phones, social networking, and communicating with your friends. This is part of the cell phone culture. Text messaging increasing use for staying in contact with family and friends. Uh, Even at a college where the internet service, telephone service is kind of spotty sometimes. Um, in between classes, don't say hi to a student. They probably won't see you because they're probably looking at their phone. When I was teaching at Ashford University, I was at Ashford from 2011 to 2016. I'll tell you what, students, as soon as they got out of class, they got on their phones. And some of the students, of course, would be trying to sneak a peek at their telephone during class, as weird as that is. And that is the end of the chapter. So, so we'll see you next week. Oh, sorry.